Hi everyone. This is the summary for chapter 9 of Hold On to Your Kids by Gordon Neufeld. This chapter is called Stuck in Immaturity. Gordon Neufeld starts out with examples of two children. The first one, her name is Sarah. She doesn't follow through on anything. Her parents worked hard on saving up for skating lessons. After 2 lessons, she wants to quit. She's very impulsive, she's impatient, and she loses her temper very easily. The second one is Peter. He's chronically impatient and irritable. At times, he's quite nasty to his little sister. He doesn't seem to be aware of his impact on the rest of the family. He's argumentative and oppositional and lacks long-term goals. His parents are very concerned, but Peter himself doesn't seem to be concerned about anything. Both parents came to see Dr. Neufeld to see if it's normal what's happening with their children, if they should be concerned. Sarah was only 4 years old, so in her case, her behavior is still age appropriate. Peter was 14, and his personality has been like this since he was a preschooler. So Gordon Neufeld calls this the Preschoolers Syndrome. This is normal when you're a preschooler, but children should keep maturing and not get stuck in this phase. Many adults have not reached maturity. They have not mastered being independent, self-motivated, individuals capable of tending their own emotional needs and of respecting the needs of others. Immaturity and peer orientation go hand in hand. So the earlier kids start to become peer-oriented, the greater the likelihood of perpetual childishness. Peter was highly peer-oriented. It wasn't clear what came first, if his immaturity made him susceptible to becoming peer-oriented, or if his peer orientation arrested his development. It can happen both ways, but either way, peer-oriented kids fail to grow up. As we mature, our brains develop the ability to mix things together, to hold different perceptions, senses, thoughts, feelings, and impulses all at the same time without becoming confused in thinking or paralyzed in action. This is called integrative functioning. Reaching this point in development has a transforming and civilizing effect. So it's important that you can think of more than one thing at a time, and you can't do that when you're little. So all of you who have preschoolers and you're concerned about them, they're still in the preschool years, so that preschool syndrome is not a thing when you're a preschooler. It's only a thing if you stay that way, then it becomes a problem. The attributes of childishness, like impulsivity and egocentrism, where you think you're the center of the universe, they fade away, and a much more balanced personality begins to emerge as you get older, or so it should. You can't teach the brain to become more mature. The integrated capacity must be developed or grown into. The ancient Romans had a word for this kind of mix. They called it temper. So being untempered means being unable to tolerate mixed feelings at the same time. That's a sign of immaturity. So for example, when Sarah got mad, she might say, "I hate you" to her mom, because her feelings were still untempered. So even though she loves her mom, at that moment she is mad, and all she can feel is the frustration of that, and the other feelings aren't mixing in yet at her stage in development. But for Peter, even though he knew certain behavior would get him into trouble, when he was very frustrated, his anger was untempered, and that's all he cared about at the time. So both the children lost their temper, and the true meaning of the word, they lost their mixed feelings. Peter had a hard time with the concept of work. It requires mixed feelings. Work is often not very attractive, but we generally do it because we can mix our resistance to do it with a commitment or purpose we have in mind for the long term. Too immature to hold on to a goal beyond immediate satisfaction. Peter worked only when he felt like it, which wasn't very often. He only felt one feeling at a time, like a preschooler. So, how do young human beings mature? Maturation starts with division, whether you're a person or a plant. So, in the most basic form, it starts with cell division. But in the brain, the two hemispheres function quite independently of each other before they become integrated. In the psychological realm, maturity involves the differentiation of the elements of consciousness: thoughts, feelings, impulses, values, opinions, preferences, interests, intentions, and aspirations. Differentiation needs to happen before all these elements can be mixed to produce tempered experiences and expression. In relationships, the child has to first become unique from other individuals before mixing with others without losing the sense of self. A sense of self has to separate from inner experience, which is absent in young children. A child has to know that they're not identical to whatever they're feeling at the time. He or she can be aware of others' conflicting feelings or thoughts at the same time and then choose how to act. So yeah, when you're little, you just feel mad, or you feel happy, or or you're sad. Like, it's just, you feel one thing at a time and you feel it intensely, and you feel like that's just you and there is no choice about how to act. But as you get older and you have mixed feelings, then you can make a conscious decision of what you do. So Sarah and Peter didn't have the ability to reflect. Sarah because she was just too little, and Peter because he was kind of stuck in immaturity still. They only felt one feeling at a time, instead of part of me feels like this and part of me feels like that. Or, on the other hand, frustration did not mix with caring, so they felt impatient. Anger did not mix with love, so they felt no forgiveness. Frustration did not mix with fear or affections, so they lost their temper. And all this happened to a lack of maturity. So for Sarah at 4 years old, this made sense. She wasn't capable of mixed feelings yet, but Peter should have been more mature at 14. For Sarah, there were encouraging signs of maturation starting to happen. The differentiation process was at work. She was eager to do things by herself and loved to figure out things on her own. She was curious and eager to explore new things. Her play was imaginative, creative, and self-satisfying. The maturation process was happening, and the parents just needed to be patient. So, with toddlers, they want to differentiate themselves from us. At first, they're so dependent on everything as infants, but as toddlers, they want to do it themselves, and they say no to things and all of that, and that's important of becoming their own person. So you got to become your own person and get a sense of self before you can, get the mixed feelings. So Peter didn't have the same drive. There was no creative solitude, no desire to figure things out himself, no pride in being self-sufficient, no attempt to be his own person. He was putting up boundaries to keep his parents out, not to be his own person, but due to his peer attachment. So, when kids are like young teenagers or teenagers and they're like, everything just sucks and it's boring and they have no motivation to do anything, that's that kind of stage. And what you'd like to see is them still to get excited about stuff. So with you keeping a healthy attachment, you can help them keep that. So maturation is spontaneous, Gordon Neufeld says, but not inevitable. So maturation happens without us having to do anything other than providing the right environment for it. But it doesn't automatically always happen to all of us. As you probably know, there's lots of adults who are quite immature still. So what activates the process of maturation? Although parents and teachers are forever telling children to grow up, maturation cannot be commanded. We can nurture the process, provide the right conditions, remove the obstacles, but we can't make a child grow up any more than we can order plants in our garden to grow. I really like that comparison because I do think lots of times as parents we feel like somehow it's our duty to make them grow up. We have to make them do it. But you don't have that power actually. It takes maturation. It's a natural process that has to happen. You can make the conditions right for it, but you can't force it. We might need to show immature children how to act, let them know what is acceptable and what our expectations are. They don't understand fairness, so we teach them to take turns. They don't understand the impact of their actions, so we have rules for them so that they know how to conduct themselves. It's impossible to be more mature than you really are. You can only act that way when appropriately cued, so you can kind of give them the guidelines, give them the script, which will be helpful while they're immature because they don't know themselves yet. But it'll also help them become more mature. Saying sorry is a lot more meaningful when the person who says it really means it, of course. So, you could force somebody to say sorry, but it doesn't mean that they mean it. And hopefully when they do become more mature, and in the meantime, you can point out to them that, look, that person is sad, and kind of, prompt some empathy in them. But yeah, it has to come from within, and often it just takes time. There is no substitute for real maturation and no shortcut for getting there. The real challenge is for parents to help their kids grow up, not just to look like grown-ups. In plants, the roots have to take hold first before the plant can grow and eventually bear fruit. For children to become separate beings, their needs for attachment need to be met. So that's the foundation of everything, the attachment need. They need to be nurtured and be able to depend on attachment unconditionally. Rather than forming children like a lump of clay, give them an environment in which they can develop and thrive. So again, like a plant needs water and it needs sunlight. Children need to know that they're loved. They need to have a healthy attachment. And then they can get on with the business of maturation. We need to release a child from preoccupation with attachments so he can pursue maturation. The secret for this is to make sure the child doesn't have to work to get his needs met for contact and closeness, to find his bearings and to orient. Only then the child is free to venture forward and grow emotionally. So, don't make them work for your love. Of course you want them to behave a certain way, that's different, but they should always know at the same time that you love them. That's unconditional. Attachment hunger is a lot like physical hunger. We need to make sure a parent has, that as parents, that children can feel assured that they're taken care of in their physical as well as their emotional needs. Otherwise, it's hard for a child to learn or focus on anything else. Like if you're really hungry, you can't focus on learning stuff. And the same as if you feel unloved, then you're going to be focused on that so much that preoccupies so much of your time and your being that it's hard for the body to focus on anything else. Children need our unconditional love and acceptance that they don't need to work for. We need to let them know when their behavior is unacceptable and at the same time still make sure that they feel loved. Even adults can feel the effects of this developmental shifting of gears. If you fall in love and you feel secure in that love, it gives you a renewal of interests and curiosity, a sense of uniqueness and an awakening of a spirit of discovery. Suddenly you feel like you can do anything. It doesn't come from someone pushing us to be more mature or independent, but from being deeply fulfilled in our attachment needs. It's inspiring. So there are 5 reasons peer orientation stunts growth. So the first one is that parental nurturing cannot get through. We already talked about that in other chapters. When a child is peer attached, they look for love and connection from their peers and repel their parents, and peer attachment doesn't usually satisfy attachment hunger. And then the second one is that peer attachments, being insecure, cannot bring a child to rest. So due to the immaturity of peers, the attachment is inherently insecure. This means a child can't rest from looking for approval, love, and significance. Being peer-oriented, like it cannot provide the growth towards true independence and maturity. Only when a child is securely attached to an adult and doesn't need to depend on peer relationships can the acceptance and companionship with another child add to a child's sense of security. So obviously your kids can have friends, that's not an issue. As long as they're properly attached to you, then friendships can add to their lives, but they need the secure attachment from you. So then the third one, how peer attachment can stunt maturation, is peer-oriented children are unable to feel fulfilled. One of the first things Gordon Neufeld checks for, like in his assessment when children come to his office, is that they have feelings of missing people and a feeling of loss. So it's a sign of emotional health. As soon as children are able to articulate, they should say things like, I miss mommy, or when is daddy coming home, or I don't think so-and-so likes me. I know that's hard for people, and it's like, it's an annoying stage for parents lots of times when they're toddlers and they miss you and you can't even go to the bathroom to get away from them or whatever, but it's an important part of development, and it's a healthy sign of their development. So he says many children today are defended, too emotionally close to experience such vulnerable emotions. So if a child is defended against vulnerability as a result of peer orientation, nothing the parent do will help to satisfy their needs. For them, nothing will ever be enough. And that's very exhausting for parents because you want to be the answer to your children when they need something. You want to be the source of fulfillment for them. Parents can only provide this when their children are attached to them. When children are peer-oriented, their attachment needs are never satisfied. So no matter how much they see their peers, they want to see them more. Kind of like an addiction. So sometimes parents say to Dr. Neufeld, but my child is absolutely obsessed with seeing friends, so it would be cruel for me to not let them. But he says it would be more cruel and irresponsible to indulge what clearly fuels the obsession. So you got to bring them back into attachment with you. The only attachment that children truly need is the kind that nurtures and satisfies them and can bring them to rest. The more demanding the child is, the more he is indicating a runaway obsession. It is not strength that the child manifests, but the desperation of a hunger that only increases with more peer contact. So I just want to say again, if you have a toddler who's like that, that's totally normal, who is like, obsessed with wanting time with you. But if you have an older child who wants friends, in a really obsessive way, you got to dial that back in the way by you spending more time with them. And if you can't spend more time with them because you're busy or you're feeling sick or you're super stressed or whatever, then see if another adult that you really trust can do that, like a grandma or an aunt or a really good friend who is really involved. Alrighty, and the number 4 is peer-oriented children cannot let go. So Gordon Neufeld says there are people who have matured well without having enjoyed a nurturing attachment with an adult. This happens when a child realizes that their attachment hunger won't be satisfied in this situation or at this time, and futility sinks in. So for some kids, they realize their parents cannot fulfill their needs at this point. So you'd have to be older to have this realization and to be okay with that, because little kids like preschool age obviously need you. But, if an older child realizes that, okay, they can't get those needs from the parent, but they're already old enough that they can kind of take care of themselves in some regards, and it's just futile, and that sinks in, then they can also become mature that way. But when they become peer oriented, things often go wrong because peers are just not a good substitute. So, peer oriented children who are defended against vulnerability, because there are just more ways to get hurt, so they're often defended against vulnerability. They won't go from frustration to futility. Instead of getting sad, they get mad. Normally, with children, you can see that they accept futility by crying. So it shows that they have moved from being frustrated to accepting that it's futile and start feeling sad instead. Tears of futility feel different from tears from physical pain or from cutting onions or other reasons. Tears of futility bring a release, a sense that something has come to an end. Peer oriented children have often lost their ability to cry. Without the ability to accept futility, maturation isn't possible. So, sometimes like kids are nagging, and only when they realize that it's futile, like the parent is not going to give in, and they start feeling their sadness, then they can move on, right? So, so it's important to be able to feel that futility, but those feelings can be too vulnerable for some. So, and the last point is peer orientation crushes individuality. Individuality means to be an individual with your own meanings, ideas, and boundaries, having your own preferences, principles, intentions, perspectives, and goals. There's something very vulnerable about showing your interests, curiosity, uniqueness, creativity, originality, new ideas, wide eyed wonder. To openly expose ourselves in this way makes us vulnerable to the reactions of others. If the reaction is too critical, this emergence of individuality quickly disappears again, whether that's from an adult or a child. So let them be themselves as much as that's possible. We need to protect children to be able to mature. Only a highly mature person can brave the reaction of those who do not recognize or value independent thought, being, or action. Children cannot be expected to welcome signs of maturity in another child. They're too driven by attachment to honor individuality. Immature people tend to trample on any individuality that dares to show itself. In a child's world, it's not immaturity, but rather the maturing process that are suspect and a source of shame. They shame those kids using words like weird, stupid, freak, or geek. They can't understand why someone might seek solitude rather than peer contact, why they can be curious and interested about things that don't involve others, and why they ask questions in class. Like the immature kids don't understand it, so they feel like attacking. There must be something wrong with these kids, and for that they deserve to be shamed. The stronger a child's peer orientation, the more intensely she will resent and assault other kids' individuality. When attachment to peers is the primary concern, individuality must be sacrificed. You get some of that on Facebook too, where if you state your individual views, you may get attacked as well. So it happens from immature adults as well. Mature adults don't feel like they need to do that. So, so we've all experienced this kind of stuff, right? When Gordon Neufield's own daughter went through a phase of peer attachment, she carefully hid her personality and her good grades from her friends. It's our job as parents to give your children the kind of attachment where they have the freedom to be themselves. And I just want to say, like, if your children are free to be themselves, they don't always all get attacked at school about it. Luckily, there is not such a, that everybody's so immature and mean. And if it does happen to your child, but they have a really good attachment to you, they also feel less vulnerable about that. They just think the other person is immature. And it's their problem that they think that. So that's another thing, that you can feel above all that nonsense if you're a mature person, even as a child. Like, if you're a mature child and somebody else is immature and acts out towards you, it just won't affect you in the same way. And and they do have you to come home to, and you'll be there to build them up, and they know that. Alrighty, that was chapter 9. It was a long one. I'll record chapter 10 separately.